The blood on her dress was still fresh when Theresa Langford stumbled into White Pine, Montana territory, on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, her shoes worn through, and her faith in humanity shattered beyond recognition. She had been walking for 3 days straight, ever since the stagecoach she had been traveling in was attacked by bandits who killed the driver and took everything of value from the passengers before scattering them like leaves in the wind. The other passengers had abandoned her at the first opportunity, too afraid to stay together, too selfish to help a young woman traveling alone. It was not the first time Theresa had been left behind, and the familiar ache of abandonment settled into her bones like an old wound reopening. White Pine was little more than a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a dusty main street, surrounded by towering pines that gave the town its name. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in the summer heat. Theresa's throat was parched, her lips cracked and bleeding. She needed water desperately, but more than that, she needed to find work and shelter before nightfall. The thought of spending another night alone under the stars, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the darkness, made her stomach clench with fear. She pushed through the doors of the first establishment she saw, which happened to be a general store. The proprietor, a thin man with wire spectacles and suspicious eyes, looked her up and down with obvious distaste. Her appearance must have been shocking, she realized. Dried blood, torn clothing, tangled dark hair that had once been carefully pinned up, now hanging in wild strands around her face. "We do not serve vagrants," the man said before she could speak. "I am not a vagrant," Theresa managed, her voice hoarse from lack of water. "I was robbed. Please, I just need some water and information about work." The man's expression did not soften. "Water costs money. And there is no work here for women in your condition." "My condition. I have been walking for 3 days without food or water. Please, I can work. I can do anything." "The only work for women like you is at the saloon, and I would not recommend it to anyone with a shred of decency left." He turned his back on her, making it clear the conversation was over. Theresa felt the familiar wave of despair wash over her. This was how it always went. People saw her vulnerability and either took advantage of it or turned away entirely. Her father had abandoned her family when she was 10, leaving them destitute. Her mother had died 3 years later, worn down by poverty and heartbreak. Theresa had been passed between reluctant relatives who made it clear she was a burden, each one eventually sending her away to someone else. At 18, she had finally struck out on her own, taking a position as a governess in St. Louis. But that family had decided to move east after just 6 months, and they had not wanted to take her with them. Then she had tried to reach a cousin in Oregon, only to have her journey end in violence and loss. She stumbled back onto the street, dizzy from dehydration and exhaustion. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she had to lean against a wooden post to keep from falling. Her vision blurred at the edges. "Miss, you need to sit down before you fall down." The voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside. Theresa looked up and found herself staring at the broadest chest she had ever seen, covered in a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt that strained against thick, muscled arms. Her gaze traveled upward to a face that was all hard planes and sharp angles, bronzed by the sun and framed by dark hair that fell past his shoulders. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds, and they looked at her with genuine concern. "I am fine," she lied automatically, because in her experience, showing weakness only invited more pain. "You are about 10 seconds from hitting the dirt," the man said, and before she could protest, He scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted, and she found herself being carried down the street, cradled against a chest that felt as solid as the mountains themselves. "Put me down," she said weakly, but she did not really mean it. For the first time in 3 days, she felt safe, even if it was an illusion that would surely shatter the moment this stranger tired of helping her. "I will put you down when we get you some water and food," he said firmly. "I am Ethan Xavier. I live up in the mountains, but I come down for supplies every few weeks. And you are Theresa Langford." She closed her eyes, too tired to maintain her defensive walls. "I was robbed. I have nothing. Then it is a good thing I found you." There was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that made her want to believe him, even though experience had taught her better. Ethan carried her to a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. She took one look at Theresa and immediately began fussing, bringing water and bread, preparing a bath, offering a clean dress that had belonged to her late daughter. "You just rest now, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, patting Theresa's hand. "Ethan will take care of everything." Theresa wanted to ask what that meant, wanted to protest that she did not need taking care of, but her body betrayed her. She drank the water gratefully, ate the bread despite her churning stomach, and allowed herself to be led to a small room with a metal tub already being filled with hot water. When she emerged an hour later, clean and wearing the simple blue cotton dress Mrs. Patterson had provided, she found Ethan sitting on the porch of the boarding house, whittling a piece of wood with a knife that looked more suited to skinning bears than creating the delicate bird that was taking shape in his large hands. He looked up when she approached, and something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "You look better," he said, setting aside his whittling. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Theresa sat down carefully in the chair next to him, maintaining a proper distance. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Xavier, but I cannot pay you back right now. I will find work, though, and I will repay you for the room and the dress and the food. I am not worried about payment." Ethan's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Tell me what happened." So she did, starting with the stagecoach attack and working backward through the series of disappointments and abandonments that had brought her to this point. She did not know why she was being so honest with this stranger. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was something about the steady way he listened, never interrupting, never judging, just letting her speak until all the words had run out. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That is a lot of people who failed you." The simple acknowledgement of that truth made her throat tighten. "Yes, I am sorry that happened to you." He turned to look at her fully, and the sincerity in his face was almost painful to witness. "But not everyone is like that. Some people stay. In my experience, no one stays." Theresa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "Everyone leaves eventually. Either they die, or they decide I am too much trouble, or circumstances change and I am disposable. That is just how it is. That is not how it has to be." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his large hands clasped together. "Look, I am not good with fancy words or pretty speeches. I spend most of my time alone in the mountains, trapping and hunting, but I know what it is like to lose people. My parents died when I was 15, killed by a fever that swept through our settlement. I had a younger sister, but she died that same winter from pneumonia. I have been on my own for 12 years, and in that time, I have learned something important." "What is that?" Theresa asked, despite herself. "That being alone and being abandoned are two different things. I chose to be alone because I found peace in the mountains. But you did not choose any of what happened to you. People made choices that hurt you, and that is on them, not you. You deserved better." Theresa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "That is a nice sentiment, Mr. Xavier, but it does not change anything. I still need to find work and a place to stay. I cannot impose on Mrs. Patterson's generosity forever, and I certainly cannot rely on the kindness of strangers." "What if it was not a stranger?" Ethan said slowly, as if working through an idea as he spoke. "What if I offered you work?" "What kind of work?" Theresa asked warily. She had heard similar offers before, and they always came with expectations she was not willing to meet. "Nothing improper," Ethan said quickly, as if reading her thoughts. "I have a cabin up in the mountains, about 2 hours' ride from here. It is a decent-sized place, more than I need really. My parents built it when they first came out here, thinking they would have a whole passel of children to fill it up. Anyway, I could use help with things around the place. Cooking, mending, keeping the cabin in order. I am not home much during trapping season, but when winter comes, I am there more often. I could pay you wages, and you would have a safe place to stay." Theresa studied him carefully, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. But his expression was open, earnest even, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers without flinching. "Why would you offer that to someone you just met?" "Because you need help, and I can provide it." Ethan shrugged his massive shoulders. "And because I think you deserve a chance to catch your breath without worrying about where your next meal is coming from or whether you have a roof over your head. You do not know me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse. Are you? No. Then I guess we are fine." He smiled, and it transformed his harsh features into something almost gentle. "Look, Miss Langford, I am not expecting anything from you except honest work. You would have your own room, complete privacy. I would not bother you. And if at any point you want to leave, I will bring you back to town, no questions asked. But I think you could use a place to rest and recover, and I think I could use the help. It seems like a fair arrangement to me." Theresa wanted to say no. Every instinct she had developed over years of disappointment told her not to trust this offer, not to let herself hope that someone might actually follow through on a promise. But she was tired, so desperately tired of fighting and struggling and being afraid. And something about Ethan Xavier, with his quiet strength and his straightforward manner, made her want to take the risk. "All right," she heard herself say. "I will accept your offer, but I want to be clear that this is strictly a working arrangement, nothing more. Understood?" Ethan stood up, extending his hand. "We have a deal then." Theresa placed her hand in his, and his grip was warm and firm and steady. For just a moment, she let herself imagine what it might be like to have someone in her life who was truly reliable, someone who did not leave. Then she pushed the thought away, because hoping for such things had only ever brought her pain. They left White Pine the next morning, after Ethan had finished purchasing his supplies and loading them onto a sturdy pack mule. He also bought Theresa proper traveling clothes, including a split riding skirt and a sturdy pair of boots, which she initially refused until he pointed out that she could not very well walk 2 hours through mountain terrain in a cotton dress and worn-out shoes. He provided her with a gentle mare named Daisy, and as they rode out of town, Theresa caught sight of the suspicious store owner watching from his doorway. She lifted her chin and did not look back. The journey into the mountains was unlike anything Theresa had experienced before. The air grew cooler and cleaner as they climbed, scented with pine and wildflowers. Ethan rode ahead on a powerful buckskin stallion, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about tricky sections of the trail. He did not try to make conversation, seeming to understand that she needed time to adjust to this new situation. The cabin appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, nestled in a small valley with a creek running nearby and mountains rising on all sides. It was larger than Theresa had expected, built from solid logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. There was a small barn for the horses, a smokehouse, and what looked like a root cellar dug into the hillside. The setting was breathtakingly beautiful, isolated and peaceful in a way that felt almost sacred. "Welcome home," Ethan said as he dismounted. Then he seemed to catch himself. "I mean, welcome to your new place of work." "It is lovely," Theresa said honestly, sliding down from Daisy's back. Her legs were shaky from the long ride, but she was determined not to show weakness. Ethan showed her around the property, pointing out where everything was kept and explaining the routines he tried to maintain. The cabin interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor dwelling, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 smaller bedrooms, and a loft space where Ethan kept his furs and supplies. He gave her the larger of the 2 bedrooms, which had a real bed with a feather mattress and a window that looked out toward the creek. "I know it is not fancy," he said, standing in the doorway, "but it is clean and warm and safe. The door has a bolt on the inside if that makes you more comfortable." "It is perfect," Theresa said, and she meant it. After so many nights of uncertainty, having a space that was truly hers, even temporarily, felt like an unimaginable luxury. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Ethan was gone most of each day, checking his trap lines or hunting for meat to smoke and preserve for winter. Theresa threw herself into the work of managing the household, finding satisfaction in tasks like baking bread, mending Ethan's worn clothing, and organizing the chaotic collection of supplies that had accumulated over years of bachelor living. She also began tending a small vegetable garden that had been neglected, carefully watering and weeding until the plants began to thrive again. Ethan was true to his word about not bothering her. He was respectful and courteous, always knocking before entering a room, always keeping a proper distance. But despite his attempt to maintain boundaries, Theresa found herself becoming increasingly aware of his presence. The way his muscles flexed when he carried heavy loads of firewood. The deep rumble of his laugh when she said something that amused him. The surprising gentleness in his large hands when he carved wood in the evenings, creating beautiful figures of animals and birds. She told herself not to develop feelings. This was just a job, just a temporary situation until she could save enough money to move on. Getting attached would only lead to heartbreak when the inevitable abandonment came. But it was hard to maintain that emotional distance when Ethan was so consistently kind and reliable. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Theresa was mending one of Ethan's shirts, and he was working on a new carving, this one of a wolf. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence, "Of course." "Why do you flinch every time I come into a room unexpectedly?" Theresa's hand stilled on the fabric. She had not realized he had noticed. "I do not mean to, I know. That is why I am asking, did someone hurt you?" She considered lying, but something about the genuine concern in his voice made her want to be honest. "Not physically. But I learned early that it is better to always be prepared for people to leave or turn on you. I suppose I am just always waiting for the other shoe to drop." Ethan set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "Theresa, I want you to understand something. I am not going anywhere. I know you have no reason to believe that based on your past experiences, but I need you to hear it anyway. I do not make promises I cannot keep, and I do not abandon people who are counting on me." "You do not know what the future holds," Theresa said quietly. "Circumstances change, people change their minds. Some circumstances, yes, but not my character. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. I am going to prove it to you. However long it takes, I am going to prove that not everyone leaves. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Why does it matter to you? Ethan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I have been watching you for 3 weeks now, and I see how hard you work, how careful you are with everything, how you never let yourself fully relax. And I see a woman who has been hurt so many times that she has forgotten what it is like to feel safe. That is wrong, Theresa. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to have people in your life who you can count on. And maybe I am not eloquent enough to say this right, but I want to be one of those people for you. Theresa felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. I do not know how to trust that. Then let me show you. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. His touch was warm and gentle and steady. Let me prove it to you day by day. I am not asking you for anything except the chance to be reliable. Can you give me that? Theresa looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused strength and her smaller, work-worn fingers. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to pull away, to protect herself, to not let herself hope. But her heart, that stubborn, battered thing, was whispering something different. All right, she said finally, but I am not promising anything. I am just agreeing to let you try. That is all I am asking. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, then released it and picked up his carving again, as if nothing monumental had just happened between them. But something had changed. Theresa felt it in the air, in the way her heart beat a little faster when Ethan smiled at her, in the way she found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together and talk about everything and nothing. She was falling, slowly and terrifyingly, and she did not know how to stop it. The first real test came in early September, when a storm rolled through the mountains with unexpected ferocity. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at the cabin's roof and sending torrents of rain against the windows. Theresa had never experienced anything like it, and by the second night of the storm, she was genuinely frightened. Ethan found her in the main room well past midnight, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the fire with wide, anxious eyes. He had been sleeping in the loft to give her more privacy, but now he came down the ladder and sat beside her without a word. I am sorry. I know it is late, Theresa said, her voice tight with tension. I just could not sleep with all the noise. Nothing to apologize for. These mountain storms can be frightening if you are not used to them. Ethan added another log to the fire, and the light danced across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the concern in his eyes. But the cabin is solid. It has weathered worse than this. What if a tree falls on it, or the roof gives way? The fears tumbled out before she could stop them. What if we get trapped here and cannot get to town for supplies? What if the creek floods? Ethan shifted closer, and when he spoke, his voice was low and soothing. The trees around the cabin were cleared specifically to prevent that. The roof was built by my father, who was the best carpenter in 3 territories. We have months' worth of supplies, and the cabin is positioned high enough that the creek has never come close to flooding us, even in the worst storms. We are safe here, Theresa. I promise you. How can you be so calm? She asked, turning to look at him. Does nothing frighten you? Plenty of things frighten me, he admitted. The thought of you leaving before I can prove myself to you. The idea that you might never feel safe enough to let your guard down. The possibility that I will fail you somehow, even though I am trying my best not to. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and intimate. But weather does not frighten me, because I know how to prepare for it and endure it. I wish I had that kind of certainty about anything, Theresa said softly. You will. Ethan's hand moved to cover hers where it clutched the blanket. Give it time. They sat together through the worst of the storm, not talking much, just sharing the warmth of the fire and each other's presence. At some point, Theresa's head drooped onto Ethan's shoulder, and she felt his arm come around her, steady and protective. She knew she should pull away, should maintain the boundaries she had set, but she was so tired of being alone. Just this once, she let herself lean on someone else. When she woke in the morning, she was in her own bed, tucked carefully under the quilts with her boots removed and placed neatly beside the door. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the morning sun. Ethan was already up making breakfast, and when she emerged from her room, he handed her a cup of coffee and smiled. Feel better? Yes, thank you. She took the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. And thank you for staying with me last night. I know I was being foolish. You were not being foolish. You were afraid, and that is human. Ethan flipped the bacon in the pan with practiced ease. I told you I was going to prove I was not going anywhere, and that includes sitting through storms with you. That is what people do when they care about each other. The casual way he said it, as if caring about her was the most natural thing in the world, made Theresa's chest tighten with emotion. She wanted to believe it so badly it hurt. As autumn deepened, and the aspens turned gold against the evergreen slopes, Theresa found herself settling into life at the cabin in ways she had not anticipated. She no longer flinched when Ethan entered a room. She laughed at his dry humor and shared stories from her own past, even the painful ones. She learned to ride Daisy with confidence and began accompanying Ethan on some of his shorter excursions into the mountains, marveling at his knowledge of the land and the easy way he moved through the wilderness. Ethan, for his part, continued to prove himself in 1,000 small ways. He never raised his voice, even when frustrated. He consulted her on decisions about the household and the property, treating her input as valuable. He taught her to shoot his rifle, patiently correcting her stance and praising her progress. He brought her gifts from the forest, beautiful stones and interesting feathers, and once, a perfect pine cone that she placed on the mantel like a treasure. One evening in late October, they were preparing for the first serious snowfall of the season. Ethan had spent the day securing the barn and checking that all their winter supplies were in order, while Theresa had been baking and preserving the last of the garden vegetables. They worked together to bring in extra firewood, stacking it against the cabin wall where it would stay dry. As they carried the last load inside, Ethan's hand brushed against Theresa's, and she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Theresa," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Her heart was pounding, though she could not have said if it was from fear or anticipation. "I know I said I was just trying to be reliable, just trying to prove that I would not leave, and that is still true. But I need to be honest with you about something else." He set down the wood he was carrying and turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I might already be in love with you. I did not plan for it to happen, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way." Theresa felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Ethan, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. I am not asking you to love me back. I am not even asking you to stay forever, though God knows I want that." He took a step closer, his large frame somehow both imposing and gentle at once. "I am just telling you the truth. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you have survived everything life has thrown at you. I love the way you hum when you are baking and the way you talk to the horses like they are people. I love that you are letting yourself heal here, letting yourself rest. And I want you to know that no matter what you decide, no matter whether you stay or go, I am not going to abandon you. You will always have a place here, and you will always have me if you want me. Theresa felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. How can you say that? How can you promise forever when everyone else in my life has broken that promise? Because I mean it. Ethan reached up and gently wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely careful. Because I have spent 4 months proving to you that I keep my word. Because I am not everyone else, Theresa. I am me and I choose you. Every single day I will choose you. I am terrified, she whispered. I am so afraid that if I let myself love you, you will leave and it will destroy me. I know, and I am not asking you to stop being afraid. I am just asking you to be afraid while I hold you, instead of being afraid alone. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself cry for the first time in longer than she could remember. He held her through it all, one large hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances that she did not have to decide anything right now, that he would wait as long as it took, that she was safe. When her tears finally subsided, Theresa pulled back just enough to look up at him. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, but his eyes were so soft with love and concern that it took her breath away. I think I love you too, she said, the words coming out shaky but true. I have been fighting it because I was so afraid, but I do. I love you, Ethan. And that terrifies me more than any storm or hardship ever could. I will spend every day of my life proving that your fear is unfounded, Ethan said, and then he kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The kiss deepened, and Theresa felt something shift inside her, like a locked door finally opening. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, and in one moment, Ethan had walked through all of them as if they were made of paper. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. I love you, he said again, as if the words were precious and needed to be repeated. And I am going to keep saying it until you fully believe that I am not going anywhere. I believe you, Theresa said, and for the first time in her life, she actually did. The first snow came that night, blanketing the world in white. Theresa woke to find Ethan stoking the fire, his hair loose around his shoulders and his muscled back illuminated by the dancing flames. She watched him for a moment, marveling at the fact that this man, this strong, reliable, beautiful man, loved her, that he had chosen her with all her fears and scars and broken pieces. I can feel you watching me, Ethan said without turning around, a smile in his voice. Maybe I like watching you, Theresa replied, surprised at her own boldness. He turned then, crossing the room to sit on the edge of her bed. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years. She reached up and touched his face, running her fingers along his jaw. Ethan, I want you to know something. I am still going to be afraid sometimes. I am still going to have moments where I worry that this is too good to be true, but I am going to try to trust you. Really try. That is all I am asking. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. And every time you have one of those moments, I will be right here to remind you that I am not going anywhere. Winter settled over the mountains in earnest, and with it came a kind of intimacy that Theresa had never experienced before. They were largely snowed in, with trips to town becoming infrequent and difficult. But rather than feeling trapped, Theresa felt cocooned, safe in their mountain sanctuary with the man she loved. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Ethan told her about his parents, about the life they had tried to build in Montana territory, about the pain of losing his entire family in the span of a few months. Theresa shared her own stories of loss and abandonment, and found that speaking them aloud to someone who truly listened somehow made them less heavy. "You ever think about having a family again?" Theresa asked one night as they lay together on the rug in front of the fire, properly clothed but intimately close. "I used to," Ethan said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "When my parents were alive, I imagined having a wife and children someday, filling this cabin the way it was meant to be filled. But after they died, I convinced myself I was better off alone. Losing people hurts too much. But you changed your mind. You changed my mind." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "The day I found you in White Pine, I thought I was just helping someone in need. But from the moment I looked at you, something shifted. I wanted to protect you, to give you a place to heal, to prove that not all men are unreliable. And then I got to know you and I realized I wanted so much more than that. I wanted everything. A life together, a real family, a future." "I want that too," Theresa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It scares me how much I want it. Then let's build it together." Ethan pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "One day at a time, we will build the life we both want, and every day I will prove to you that I am here to stay." The second test came in December, when Ethan developed a severe fever. It started as a simple cough that he dismissed as nothing, but within 2 days, he was burning up and barely able to stand. Theresa found herself thrust into the role of caretaker, terrified that she was going to lose him just when she had finally allowed herself to love someone. She spent 3 days nursing him, forcing him to drink water and broth, cooling his fever with damp cloths, praying to any god that might be listening that he would pull through. On the 3rd night, his fever finally broke, and when he opened his eyes and smiled weakly at her, she burst into tears of relief. "I thought I was going to lose you," she sobbed, clutching his hand. "I thought you were going to die and leave me alone again." "I am not going anywhere," Ethan rasped, his voice rough from illness. "I told you that. Not even death is going to keep me from you if I have anything to say about it. Do not joke about that." Theresa wiped her eyes angrily. "I was terrified. I know, and I am sorry, but listen to me." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "The fact that I got sick does not mean I abandoned you. Sometimes bad things happen, but that does not change my commitment to you. I fought to stay alive because I have something worth living for. You, Theresa, I fought for you." She understood then what he was trying to tell her. That staying did not mean nothing bad would ever happen. It meant facing those bad things together instead of alone. It meant choosing each other even when circumstances were difficult. It meant commitment that went deeper than just good times and easy moments. "I love you," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "And I am going to take care of you until you are better, and then I am going to be furious with you for scaring me like this." "That is fair," Ethan said with a weak smile. "I love you too." He recovered slowly, and Theresa found strength she did not know she possessed. She kept the cabin running, cared for the animals, managed their food supplies, and tended to Ethan with a devotion that surprised them both. When he was finally well enough to sit up and move around, he pulled her into his arms and held her for a long time. "You saved my life," he said into her hair. "You saved mine first," she replied. "In White Pine when you found me. You saved my life in every way that matters." "Then I guess we are even." He pulled back to look at her, and his expression was so full of love that it made her breath catch. "Theresa Langford, will you marry me?" She had known the question was coming, had felt it building between them over the past months. But hearing it spoken aloud still made her heart race. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in January of 1879 in a simple ceremony in White Pine with Mrs. Patterson and the local minister as witnesses. Theresa wore a dress of deep blue wool that Ethan had purchased for her, and he wore a new shirt that she had sewn for him. There was no fanfare, no crowd of well-wishers, but Theresa did not care. All that mattered was the way Ethan looked at her as they exchanged vows, the way his voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and protect her for the rest of his life. "I promise to never leave you," he added to the traditional vows, his storm-gray eyes locked on hers. "Through every hardship, every test, every moment of doubt or fear, I will be by your side. This is my vow to you, Theresa. I am yours for as long as I live." "And I promise to trust you," Theresa said, tears streaming down her face, "to believe in your love even when my fears tell me otherwise. To build a life with you and fill our home with the family we both want. I choose you, Ethan. Every day I choose you." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her, Theresa felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. Not just in this place, but with this man, who had proven his love through actions rather than just words. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and Theresa discovered that marriage to Ethan was everything she had hoped for and more. He was patient and gentle with her, understanding that physical intimacy was new and sometimes frightening for someone who had learned to always be on guard. He never pushed, never demanded, simply loved her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and safe. Their wedding night was sweet and slow, full of whispered words of love and gentle discoveries. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed that was now truly theirs, Ethan held her close and said, "Thank you for trusting me with this, with all of you." "Thank you for being worth trusting," Theresa replied, tracing the strong lines of his chest with her fingers. "Thank you for staying, even when I kept pushing you away. I told you I was not going anywhere." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are stuck with me, Mrs. Xavier." Mrs. Xavier. Theresa tested the name in her mind and found that she loved it. She had a name that belonged to someone, a place in the world that was not tenuous or temporary. She had a home and a husband, and for the first time in her life, a future that felt secure. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting in patches to reveal the green beneath. As the world came back to life, Theresa felt herself blooming too. She was no longer the frightened, desperate woman who had stumbled into White Pine 10 months ago. She was stronger now, more confident, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and chosen and safe. In April, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complicated mix of joy and fear. Joy because she and Ethan had talked about wanting children, about filling the cabin with the family his parents had dreamed of. Fear because having a child would make her even more vulnerable, would give her one more precious thing that could be lost. She told Ethan that evening, her hands shaking as she spoke the words. "I am going to have a baby." His face transformed, lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. He let out a whoop of happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Theresa asked, needing to hear it. "Happy, Theresa, I am overjoyed, ecstatic. This is everything I have ever wanted." He cupped her face in his large hands, his gray eyes shining. "A life with you, a family, a future. You have given me everything." "I am scared," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother? What if something happens to you or the baby and I am alone again?" "Those are all understandable fears," Ethan said gently. "But let me tell you what I know. You are going to be an amazing mother because you understand what it is like to not have that security, and you will make sure our child never feels that way. Nothing is going to happen to me because I have too much to live for, and even if the worst were to happen, you would not be alone. You are stronger than you know, Theresa. You have survived so much, and you will survive whatever comes. But more importantly, you do not have to worry about worst-case scenarios because I am going to be right here, taking care of you and our baby for the rest of our lives. His certainty, the absolute conviction in his voice, helped calm her fears. "Promise me," she said. "Promise me you will stay. I promise you with every fiber of my being." He placed his hand over her still flat stomach, his expression reverent. "I am going to be here for every moment. Every kick, every worry, every midnight feeding. I am not going anywhere." The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and her fears about abandonment intensified at times, manifesting in nightmares where she woke crying, convinced that Ethan had left her. But every single time he was there, holding her, reassuring her, proving yet again that he was not going anywhere. As summer ripened the mountain meadows with wildflowers, Theresa's belly grew round with their child. Ethan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly checking to make sure she was not overexerting herself, insisting on doing most of the heavy work around the cabin. She found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood that his protectiveness came from love, not from a desire to control her. One warm evening in July, they sat outside watching the sunset, Ethan's hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby kicked, and he laughed with delight. "That was a strong one," he said. "This child is going to be a force to be reckoned with, just like their father." Theresa leaned against him, content in a way she had never thought possible. "Ethan, do you realize that it has been almost a year since we met? Best year of my life," he said without hesitation. "You know what I remember most about that day?" "What?" "The way you looked so determined to keep going even though you were ready to collapse. You did not want my help, but you took it anyway because you knew you needed it. That takes courage, accepting help. And you have been brave every day since, facing your fears and learning to trust me. I am proud of you, Theresa. I want you to know that." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I could not have done any of it without you. You gave me a reason to be brave." "We gave each other reasons," Ethan corrected. "That is what love is, I think. Giving each other reasons to be brave, and then being there to catch each other when courage falters." Their son was born in late August, after a long and difficult labor that tested both Theresa's strength and Ethan's composure. Mrs. Patterson had come to stay with them for the birth, and her experienced hands helped guide the baby into the world. When Ethan first held his son, his tough mountain man exterior crumbled, and he wept openly with joy. "He is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Theresa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James Everett Xavier, after Ethan's father. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he was surrounded by love. Theresa discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared. Yes, she was tired and overwhelmed at times, but Ethan was true to his word. He woke for midnight feedings, changed diapers, walked the floor with James when he was fussy, and made sure Theresa had time to rest and recover. "You are such a good father," she told him one morning, watching him hold their sleeping son with infinite gentleness despite his massive, work-roughened hands. "I had good examples in my parents, even though I lost them too soon." Ethan looked down at James with an expression of pure love. "And I have a good partner in you. We are doing this together, just like we do everything." The first real crisis of their marriage came when James was 3 months old. Ethan had ridden into White Pine for supplies, a trip that usually took him one long day there and back. But a day passed, then two, then three, and he did not return. Theresa tried to stay calm, tried to tell herself that there were many reasonable explanations for the delay. But with each passing hour, her old fears resurfaced with a vengeance. He had left her. He had finally decided that she was too much trouble, that the responsibility of a wife and child was more than he wanted to bear. He had abandoned her just like everyone else had, and she had been foolish to think he would be different. She spent the third night unable to sleep, pacing the cabin floor with James in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she tried to figure out what she would do now that she was alone again. At dawn on the fourth day, she heard hoofbeats. Her heart leaped, torn between hope and fear, and she rushed to the window. Relief flooded through her when she saw Ethan riding up on his buckskin, clearly exhausted but alive and whole. She ran outside, James clutched to her chest, and when Ethan dismounted, she saw that his left arm was wrapped in blood-stained bandages. "Theresa, I am so sorry," he said immediately, his face haggard with exhaustion and pain. "I know I was gone longer than I said. Are you all right? Am I all right?" "Ethan, you are hurt. What happened?" She ushered him inside, torn between relief that he had returned and concern over his injury. "Mountain lion attacked me on the trail home," he explained as she helped him sit down and began carefully unwrapping the bandage. "Got my arm pretty good before I could shoot it. I managed to make it to a homestead about 5 miles from here, and the family there patched me up and insisted I stay until the bleeding stopped. I sent one of their sons to tell you, but I am guessing he never made it here." "No, no one came." Theresa examined the deep claw marks on his arm, grateful to see that whoever had treated him had done a good job of cleaning and binding the wound. "You could have been killed, but I was not." Ethan reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek, wiping away tears she did not realize she was crying. "I am here, Theresa. I came back. I will always come back." "I thought you had left us," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I spent 3 days convincing myself that you had finally abandoned me, that I had been foolish to trust you. And I hated myself for thinking that, but I could not stop the fear. Look at me." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "I did not leave. I was delayed because I was injured, and the people who helped me would not let me ride until they were sure I would not bleed to death on the trail. But not for 1 second did I consider not coming back to you and James. You two are my entire world. A mountain lion, a snowstorm, an avalanche, nothing is going to keep me from coming home to you. You understand? Nothing." "I am sorry I doubted you," Theresa whispered. "Do not apologize for being afraid. You have every reason to be based on your past. But I am going to keep proving to you for the rest of our lives, if necessary, that I am different, that when I make a promise, I keep it." He pulled her close with his good arm, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, letting his solid presence calm her racing heart. James, who had been remarkably patient through all of this, chose that moment to start fussing. Ethan laughed and held out his good arm. "Let me hold my son. I missed him almost as much as I missed you." As Theresa watched her husband cradle their baby, murmuring soft words to him, she felt her fear finally begin to release its grip on her heart. Ethan had been attacked by a mountain lion, injured badly enough that he could have died, and his first thought had been to get home to his family. That was not the action of a man who was planning to leave. That was the action of a man who meant every word he said. Over the following weeks, as Ethan's arm healed, Theresa found herself undergoing a transformation. The incident had been a test, perhaps the biggest one yet, and Ethan had passed it without even trying. He had simply been who he had always been, reliable, devoted, true to his word. And slowly, finally, Theresa began to let go of her fear of abandonment. Not completely, because old wounds ran deep, but enough that she could breathe easier, trust more fully, love more freely. Winter came again, their second as a married couple, and this time Theresa embraced the isolation rather than fearing it. The cabin was full of life now, with James growing bigger and more alert every day, babbling and smiling at his parents. Ethan had never been happier, and it showed in everything he did. He doted on both his wife and his son, and in the evenings, he would hold James and tell him stories about his grandparents, about the life they had built in Montana territory, about the legacy of love and strength that the baby would inherit. "I want him to know where he comes from," Ethan told Theresa one night as they watched the fire. "I want him to know that his grandparents were brave people who built something meaningful. And I want him to know that his mother is the strongest person I have ever met, who survived more hardships than anyone should have to endure and still found the courage to love." "You make me sound much braver than I am," Theresa said, though his words warmed her heart. "I am just telling the truth." Ethan shifted James to his other arm, the baby now sleeping peacefully. "You are brave, Theresa, and I am going to make sure our son knows it. I am going to make sure he grows up understanding that love is not just a feeling. It is a commitment, a choice you make every day. And I am going to show him what that looks like by loving you every day for the rest of my life." True to his word, Ethan continued to prove his love and commitment through both words and actions. When James was a year old and Theresa discovered she was pregnant again, Ethan was just as overjoyed as the first time. When she went through a period of depression after their daughter was born, feeling overwhelmed and inadequate, Ethan held her through the darkness and reminded her of her strength until she could see it again herself. When a particularly harsh winter left them snowed in for weeks with 2 small children and dwindling supplies, Ethan remained calm and resourceful, never once complaining or showing frustration. Their daughter, named Sarah Mee after Ethan's mother, was as different from her brother as night from day. Where James was quiet and thoughtful, Sarah was loud and adventurous, always getting into things she should not. But both children were loved fiercely, and both grew up in a home filled with laughter and security. As the years passed, Theresa looked back on the terrified woman she had been when she first stumbled into White Pine and marveled at how much she had changed. She was confident now, secure in her identity as a wife and mother, no longer afraid that everything she loved would be ripped away from her. Ethan had proven himself in 1,000 ways, large and small, until his reliability was as certain as the mountains that surrounded their home. One evening when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, the family sat outside watching the sunset. The children were chasing fireflies, their laughter ringing through the mountain air, while Ethan and Theresa sat close together on the porch. "You remember the first sunset we watched together?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "How could I forget? I was still so afraid of trusting you." Theresa leaned into him, comfortable and content. "I have come a long way since then. We both have. We have built a good life here, Theresa. A real family, the kind I dreamed about but did not think I would ever have after I lost my parents." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for letting me prove myself to you." "Thank you for being worth believing in," Theresa replied. "Thank you for staying through every test, every moment of doubt, every time I pushed you away out of fear. You never left, Ethan. Even when I gave you reasons to, you stayed. I told you I would." His voice was soft but certain. "And I am going to keep staying every day for the rest of our lives." That is what love is. That is what family is. showing up day after day, choosing each other even when it is hard. "I love you," Theresa said, the words coming easily now without fear or hesitation. "I love you too. Always." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sky turned gold and pink and purple. Theresa thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and loss and fear that had shaped her. But she also thought about everything that had healed in her since Ethan had found her in White Pine. All the ways he had shown her that not everyone leaves, that some people stay even when the staying is hard. She had been so afraid of being abandoned again, convinced that everyone eventually left. But Ethan had proven her wrong. He had stayed through every test, every crisis, every moment of doubt. He had held her when she cried, caught her when she fell, and loved her even when she did not know how to love herself. He had given her a home and a family, and most importantly, the security to finally let down her walls and trust in a future that did not involve loss. As the years continued to unfold, Ethan and Theresa's love only deepened. They weathered the challenges that all families face: lean years when the hunting and trapping were poor, illnesses that required long trips to White Pine for the doctor, the normal conflicts and frustrations of raising children. But through it all, Ethan never wavered in his commitment. He was steady as the mountains themselves, reliable as the sunrise, constant in his love and devotion. When James was 10 and Sarah was 8, Theresa gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. By then, Theresa no longer felt the familiar panic of vulnerability that pregnancy had once triggered. She knew, bone deep, that Ethan would be there. She knew he would help with midnight feedings and diaper changes, that he would take on extra work to give her time to rest, that he would love their new baby with the same fierce devotion he showed their other children. On Thomas's first birthday, as they celebrated together with a simple cake and small gifts, Ethan pulled Theresa aside. "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, curious at his serious tone. "It has been almost 9 years since I found you in White Pine. 9 years since I carried you to Mrs. Patterson's and decided I was going to prove to you that not everyone leaves." He took her hands in his gray eyes intense. "I want you to know that every single day of those 9 years has been the greatest privilege of my life. Getting to love you, building a family with you, watching you become the confident, joyful woman you were always meant to be. I want you to know that I have never regretted my choice, not for 1 second, and I never will." Theresa felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears. "I know that now. It took me a long time to truly believe it, but I know it now. You have proven yourself in every way that matters, Ethan. You showed me what real love looks like, what real commitment means. You saved me, not just in White Pine that day, but every day since." "We saved each other," Ethan corrected gently. "I was living half a life before you came along, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something lasting. We are partners, Theresa. We always have been." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while their children played nearby and the mountains stood sentinel over their home. It was a kiss full of promise and remembrance, a celebration of all they had built together and all they would continue to build in the years to come. As time continued its steady march forward, Ethan and Theresa grew old together. Their children grew up strong and confident, raised by parents who showed them every day what committed love looked like. James became a skilled tracker and hunter like his father, eventually building his own cabin just over the ridge and starting his own family. Sarah married a young man from White Pine, a blacksmith with gentle hands and a good heart. Thomas, the youngest, chose to stay on the home place, helping his aging parents and eventually taking over the property when they were ready to retire. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and losses, Ethan kept his promise. He stayed. When Theresa's old fears occasionally surfaced in nightmares or moments of stress, he was there to soothe them. When his own health began to fail in his later years, she was there to care for him with the same devotion he had always shown her. They had built a life together, solid and real, founded on trust that had been hard-earned but was now unshakable. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, they sat on the porch of the cabin that had been their home for so many years. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, and the sounds of their laughter filled the mountain air. Ethan's hair was more gray than dark now, and Theresa's face showed the lines of a life well lived, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been when they first fell in love. "You remember when you told me you were afraid I would leave?" Ethan asked, his voice a bit rougher with age but still strong. "How could I forget? I was so certain that you would abandon me, that everyone always did." Theresa shook her head at her younger self's fears. "I wish I could go back and tell that frightened woman in white pine that everything was going to be all right, that she was going to find someone who would prove her wrong about love." "She would not have believed you," Ethan said with a smile. "She needed to live it, to experience it day by day. That is the only way the fear could truly heal. You are right, and you gave me that. Every single day for almost 40 years, you have shown me what it means to stay. You have loved me through everything, Ethan. Through my fears and my doubts, through hardships and joys, through everything life has thrown at us. You never left. I told you I would not." He reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his joints. "And I meant it. Every day I chose you. Every day I will choose you for as long as I draw breath." "I know," Theresa said simply, and she did. The fear that had once dominated her life was gone, healed by decades of steady, faithful love. She knew, as certainly as she knew her own name, that Ethan would be by her side until the end. That was what he had promised her all those years ago, and that was what he had delivered. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Their grandchildren played nearby, the latest generation of a family built on love and commitment. And Theresa thought about how different her life could have been if Ethan had not found her that day in White Pine, if he had not offered her work and safety, if he had not patiently proven his reliability until she could finally trust. He had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Not by sweeping in and solving all her problems, but by showing up consistently, by loving her steadily, by proving through actions rather than just words that he was there to stay. He had given her the greatest gift she could imagine, the security to love without fear, to build without worrying that it would all be torn away, to finally feel like she had found her place in the world. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, still as broad and strong as it had been when they first met. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the family they had created, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them through everything. "Thank you," Theresa said softly. "For what? For staying. For loving me. For proving that my fear was wrong. For giving me a family and a home and a future I never dared to dream of." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "For being exactly who you said you would be, every single day." "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust me, even when everything in your past told you not to. Thank you for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa Xavier, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They stayed on the porch long after the sun had set, watching the stars emerge one by one, listening to the sounds of their grandchildren being called inside by their parents, feeling the peace that came from a life well lived and a love well earned. Ethan Xavier had promised to stay through every test, to never leave her side, and he had kept that promise for nearly 40 years. And he would keep it for whatever time remained to them, because that was who he was. He was a man of his word, a mountain of stability in a world that had so often been unstable for Theresa. He was her home, her safety, her proof that sometimes, despite all the evidence to the contrary, people really did stay. And stay he did, through all the remaining years of their lives, until they both passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, so intertwined in life that even death could not keep them apart for long. Their children and grandchildren mourned them, but also celebrated them, because Ethan and Theresa Xavier had shown them all what real love looked like. They had proven that commitment was not just a word but a daily choice, that family was built through consistency and care, that the deepest wounds could heal when someone loved you enough to stay. The cabin in the mountains remained in the Xavier family, passed down through generations, a testament to the life Ethan and Theresa had built together. And sometimes, when the sunset painted the mountains gold and the evening air was sweet with pine, those who lived there swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had started it all. The mountain man who had stayed through every test, and the woman who had finally learned that not everyone leaves. Together, they had created something lasting and beautiful, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. Their story became a legend in White Pine, told and retold over the years. The tale of the desperate woman who stumbled into town with nothing, and the mountain man who gave her everything by simply staying. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love are not grand gestures but quiet consistency, not dramatic declarations but daily choices to show up and be present. Ethan Xavier had proven his love through reliability, through being there every single day, through never giving Theresa a reason to doubt his commitment. And in doing so, he had healed wounds that went deeper than physical scars, had given her the security to become the woman she was always meant to be. Years after their deaths, their great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and listen to the stories of Ethan and Theresa, of how they had built a love that lasted a lifetime. They would learn about commitment and trust, about fear and healing, about the power of simply staying when everything else in someone's world had taught them to expect abandonment. And they would carry those lessons forward, creating their own families, building their own legacies, always remembering the mountain man and the woman who had shown them all what true love really meant. The end.